Welcome back to the movie recap. Today's movie will be a 2017 French drama film titled See You Up There. So sit back, relax and enjoy the video. The movie begins in Morocco in November 1920. The police officers take a guy named Albert Maillard, who is handcuffed and brought into the station. As the officer asks him about his details, he also urges Albert about his relationship with Edouard Pericourt, and Albert begins to narrate the story. The pair first met on November 9, 1918, in the middle of the war against Germany. They were both privates at that time, and they enjoyed the company of each other. Knowing Edouard as a cheeky, clever young man who always loves to draw, even in the middle of firing and bombing. Edouard loves doing portraits of his comrades, and one of them is Albert. But, on the other hand, Albert is a more serious, old-aged man whose goal is only to survive, go home, and marry his fiancée Cécile. The lieutenant of the troop is Henri Pradel, a middle-aged man who is scarier than the Germans. He loves wars and combating with people, and that's his passion. Meanwhile, a messenger dog comes into their hideout, carrying a message for them to cease the war. Then, to test whether the Germans are still alive on the other side, Pradel asks two guys to come as frontliners, their use, a terrified new kid, and old Grisonier. These two come up from their hideout until they hear a loud noise of gunshots that indicates another attack has started. All of them start to come out of their places and attack the Germans, with bombs and gunshots everywhere. It's impossible to avoid either because it keeps firing like an endless cycle. Albert sees the corpses of their Hughes and Grisonier, and he notices that their gunshots are at their backs, which means that the Germans do not shoot them but someone from their troop. When he looks back, he sees Pradel also looking at him, pointing his gun right to his face and shooting in his direction. Albert stumbles into a big dug hole as Pradel runs after him. Still, there's a giant bomb coming into their place that stops Pradel from killing him. After the bomb explodes, a pile of dust and sand pours into Albert, and he cannot stand on his own. The moment he opens his eyes, he is beside a dead horse. Albert thinks he's going to die, but there is a hand that grabs him upward from the hole. It's Edouard. When Edouard successfully saves and revives his friend, he is the one who gets shot in the neck. Albert is now the one who is trying to keep him, and he asks his comrades for health support for his dying friend. The next moment they are together is when Edouard is confined in the hospital, losing a lot of blood from his neck. As caring a friend as he is, Albert is begging the nurse to give morphine to Edouard to at least lessen his pain. But the nurse refuses to give since many soldiers are also wounded, and Edouard is not the only patient in the hospital. So finally, out of desperation, Albert outwits the nurse and takes some morphine to the other rooms of the hospital. After he gets what he needs, he immediately gives it to Edouard. Edouard hallucinated about his miserable, heartbreaking childhood. He sees his dead mother and his life before his father took over the responsibilities as a single father. Edouard and his dad were never close and always hated each other until Edouard left home to join the military. When Edouard wakes up for the second time, he grabs the silver plate beside him to look at his face. When he pulls down the gauze that tapes around his neck, he sees his jawless face reflection of himself. He freaks out, and the only thing Albert can do is give him anything that can make him sleep, so he does. After an hour and so, Edouard wakes up and begs Albert not to send him home, and it is okay for him to be with Albert until the day he dies. On Albert's account, he needs to do everything to save his friend, so he kills Edouard's files. Albert changed his name to Eugene Lariviere, so him to be able to get the medication that he needed and also to travel with a permit. The next day, Albert sends Edouard to the bigger hospital in the city, and he stays there for a while to write letters for his fiancée and inform the Pericourts about Edouard's death. When Albert is about to go, Pradel sees him in the train station and grabs him to meet Edouard's grieving sister, Madeleine. She asks Albert where his brother lies and wants to see his tomb. So being forced as he is, Albert has no choice but to choose a nameless grave and put Edouard's dog tag on it, which he shows to his sister. Madeleine wants to see his brother's corpse, but fortunately, Pradel can convince her not to. Pradel also knows that Albert is lying about Edouard's death. A few months later, Albert can get his own flat in Paris, where he lives with Edouard. He keeps up multiple jobs in the advertising industry and as an elevator operator in Le Bon Marché to provide for himself and Edouard. On the other hand, Edouard loses his interest in arts, always lying on the couch all day. He demands too much morphine from Albert for his unending pain, but since it's expensive and there are limited supplies, Albert robs veterans and disabled soldiers and gets their morphine. He can supply Edouard's needs. Meanwhile, Pradelle is called into his business, and some officials check out the graves of the dead soldiers. Little did they know that they mismatched the names and the corpse, but Pradelle threatened these officials and continued his doings. Back in the flat, Edouard puts his attention on masked clays. Then, one of his neighbors, a young girl named Louise, who always delivers newspapers into their room, comes up to him. She eventually convinces Edouard to reveal his face. With this action, Edouard bursts into tears and hugs his little friend. In a massive courthouse, Chairman Marcel Pericourt asks everyone out to meet Pradelle, and he is a powerful, wealthy man. They are talking about the issues regarding the soldiers' graves when Chairman Marcel suddenly collapses. Pradelle thinks he died, and everyone comes into the room thinking he killed the old man. Fortunately, the doctors can save Chairman Marcel, and he lives. However, when Albert returns home, he notices that Edouard is becoming himself again. There are drawings cluttered in the room, and he sees Edouard wearing a beautiful, gracious mask that he made himself. Louise is the spokesperson for Edouard, and she translates everything for him. The lair shows Albert the newspaper that is searching for memorials for the dead. Albert questions at first because it seems impossible until the two argue and end up fighting each other. Albert loses control and reprimands Edouard. It hurts both of them until Edouard walks out of the flat. Without knowing Edouard's whereabouts, Albert continues his job, and the disabled veterans he used to beat up are now the ones beating him up. When he gets home, he tries to find the morphines he set aside for Edouard. When he realizes that it's not there anymore, Albert notices that Louise is looking out the window. When he gets by, he finds Edouard at Louise's place, apologizing and asking what the plan is. Edouard demands Albert get a lot of money to contribute to the plan, and they need to make catalogs and scatter them across Paris. Then, they need to get into the competition, get the money, and run. After Albert works all day, he is surprised by the presence of Madeleine Pericourt in his compound. Madeleine explains that her father, Chairman Marcel, wants to invite Albert for dinner to talk about Edouard and to get to know him more. With a lot of nervousness buzzing throughout his body, Albert was cold. He could only say yes to Madeleine until she left. He is astounded. The following night, Albert goes to the Pericourt's massive Grand Chateau residence. When he gets in, Albert is mesmerized by everything he sees and can't believe how rich Edouard is. While sitting in the living room, he hears chatter from the door, then hides. Only to find out it's Pradelle, who is now part of the family as Madeleine's husband. When Pradelle leaves the house, Madeleine is at Albert's nervous body, and he asks her if he can go because he is not feeling well. But with only a few words exchanged, Chairman Marcel is also there, leaving Albert no choice but to stay. While chatting in the living room, Albert describes how brave Edouard is and how close their friendship is. They continue talking until dinner. Albert is about to leave the house when Chairman Pericourt offers him a job as a bookkeeper, which he accepts immediately. Back then, Albert explained to the officer how he stole money from the chairman and would get a percentage from every deposit he received, giving him easy cash within 3 days. After Albert gets the money, he can print Edouard's catalogs and start their business. When they finally had the catalogs, they spread them across Paris. At first, getting customers is hard, but as time passes, tons of order letters are in their mail. Finally, Edouard chooses another name as his alias for the business, and it's Jules Depremont. After they get bulk orders, they slowly enjoy the 100,000 francs they receive. Edouard uses their cash as his props and enjoys it with Louise, when he stumbles across Albert's jacket. Edouard immediately recognizes the perfume in the coat. It is his sister's. Albert denies it at first, but Edouard knows that the smell is custom-made for his sister, so Albert tells the truth. Edouard also discovers the picture of Madeleine and Pradelle in the pocket. The happiness fades away like a blow of wind. Sadness replaces the presence of the house. Albert attempts to return to Pericourt's house but is too scared. When he gets home, he takes Edouard and Louise to the Ministry of Pensions. They plan to take an act of revenge against Pradelle. They look for an officer who has been working for so long but wasn't able to get any promotions or pensions, and Edouard immediately recognizes Joseph Merlin. The three of them go to Joseph's office, and they can confirm where his office is located and write a letter about the unusual things that Pradelle is doing in the cemeteries. The following day in Chazier's Malmont Military Cemetery, Pradelle is surprised by Joseph's presence. It's an inspection that he's not expecting. Joseph is shocked by what he sees in front of his eyes, all the crimes that Pradelle is committing. The next time Joseph is there, he grabs one of the coffins and inspects it. It is suspicious because all the coffins are the same size, only for 5-foot-tall people, which is uncommon for European soldiers. Since Predel's secret is exposed, he gives Joseph a coffin full of francs, 100,000 francs. Joseph accepted it and left. On the other hand, Chairman Marcel looks at each possible statue they will build. To his surprise, one of the drawings catches his attention because, in one of its details, he recognizes Edouard's signature, a triangular signature that looks like a self-portrait. He grabs a magnifying glass to confirm it, and he does, so that's the art he picks. In the middle of the night, a nervous assistant named Dupré knocks into a bedroom, Predel's. He says that Joseph Merlin exposed him and filed charges against his wrongdoings and bribery. After Predel gets to his senses, Dupré resigns and leaves his boss alone. Albert returns to the flat only to discover that Edouard has moved to Lutetia. They are enjoying the party life. They spend their money for their happiness and enjoyable life. They wake up next to clutter from last night's party with an intense hangover, not knowing that their secret is about to get exposed. Laberdin, Chairman Marcel's assistant, is freaking out with frustration when he finds out that the name Jules Deprimont is fake. Everything fake about the business. They are scammed. Chairman Marcel calmly processes what is happening and tries to figure out how to release his anger. That same night, Predel returns to his wife, Madeleine, who is breaking up with her. Because she finally finds out about her husband's wrongdoings, she openly admits that she only uses Predel for her convenience to get offspring and have a name for power. That breaks Predel's heart as he walks out of the bedroom. But, with pure devastation, Chairman Marcel still asks to meet him in the middle of the night. They exchange a deal, and Chairman Marcel will clear out Predel's name and charges in exchange for Predel finding out who Jules Deprimont is and killing him. After the agreement, Predel starts his investigation, only to find the pieces left in a big puzzle. Slowly but surely, he goes to places where Edouard, Louise, and Albert go. Until he finally gets the name, Eugene Lariviere. When Predel knows about this, he quickly informs his father-in-law, and Chairman Marcel asks to meet Eugene. The next moment is when Albert goes to the building site where Predel works. It's full of sand and construction materials. Predel kicks Albert out. Still, he slowly grabs a gun from his pocket and points it out to Predel. The other workers evacuate themselves as Predel is begging for his life. He steps backward, away from Albert, until he accidentally falls off the excavation and the mountain of sand pours into him. Albert tries to help Predel to get out of it, but it's too late and dangerous, and in the end, Predel dies. Back in Lutetia, Edouard chills out of the rooftop with Louise while waiting for Chairman Marcel. He wears his most beautiful mask, a blue bird one. When Chairman Marcel walks into the place, no words come out of Edouard. But Chairman Marcel knows that it's his son, so he tells him how sorry he is, how proud he is as Edouard's father, and how he loves his son like no other. Edouard cries and hugs his father, and a few moments after, he jumps out from the balcony and takes his own life. That's the end of the story. Albert, all of the officers inside the police station are speechless. Finally, when the head officer asks everyone out, he tells Albert to leave that place as soon as possible and run for his life. When Albert asks why he is doing this, he confesses that he is Officer Theroux's father. The movie ends with Albert, Julianne, the Pericourt's maid, and Louise starting their new life in a new country.